On a June morning in 1929, the staff at the Cavalier Hotel in Virginia Beach discovered something terrible on the concrete patio below the 6th floor. The crushed body of an 82-year-old man lay sprawled in the early morning light. His name was Adolf Coors. He had built one of America's greatest brewing empires from nothing. He had arrived in this country as a penniless stowaway, risen to unimaginable wealth, and constructed a Victorian mansion in the Colorado mountains that would witness more tragedy than triumph. And now, after 61 years of chasing an impossible dream of perfection, he had stepped off a window ledge and let gravity deliver its final verdict. The coroner ruled it an accident. The family buried the truth, and the mansion he built for his wife would keep its secrets for another century. To understand how one house could contain so much darkness, we must travel back to a cramped ship crossing the Atlantic Ocean in 1868. Hidden somewhere below deck, a 21-year-old orphan named Adolf Coors pressed himself into the shadows, praying the crew would not discover him. He was a stowaway, a criminal, a young man fleeing conscription into the Prussian army with nothing but the clothes on his back and a dream burning in his chest. He wanted to brew beer. Not just any beer, but the finest beer the world had ever tasted. And he believed America was the only place where such a dream could come true. The boy who would become Adolf Coors had known suffering from the very beginning. Born on February 4th, 1847, in Barmen, Prussia, a city that would later become part of Wuppertal, Germany, young Adolf lost both his parents to tuberculosis before he turned 15. Orphaned and alone, he was placed in a Catholic orphanage while his two younger siblings scattered to other institutions. The boy had no money, no family, and no future, but he had already discovered something that would define his entire existence. Across the street from the orphanage stood the Wenker Brewery, and through its windows, Adolf could watch the ancient craft of brewing come alive. The copper kettles gleaming in the firelight, the sweet smell of malt and hops drifting through the streets, the precision required to transform simple ingredients into liquid gold. At 14 years old, Adolf signed a 3-year apprenticeship contract with Heinrich Wenker. He would learn to brew beer, and in doing so he would learn to transform suffering into something beautiful. For the next several years, young Adolf mastered every aspect of the brewing trade. He learned how temperature affected fermentation, how water quality shaped flavor, how patience separated mediocre beer from magnificent beer. His teachers recognized his unusual dedication, his almost obsessive attention to detail, his refusal to accept anything less than perfection. But as Adolf's skills grew, so did the political tensions in Prussia. By 1868, the young brewer faced a choice that would determine the rest of his life. He could submit to conscription and spend years fighting in wars he did not believe in, or he could risk everything on a desperate gamble to reach America. He chose America, but he had no money for passage. So Adolf made his way to the port of Hamburg and did something that would haunt him for the rest of his days. He stowed away aboard a ship bound for Baltimore. When the crew discovered him somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, the captain could have thrown him overboard or clapped him in irons. Instead, the captain offered a deal. Work your way across, and we will call it even. Adolf spent the remainder of the voyage laboring alongside the crew, his hands raw and bleeding, his body exhausted, but his spirit unbroken. When the ship finally docked in Baltimore, he walked down the gangplank with nothing but his skills and his shame. He was so mortified by his illegal entry that he would forbid his family from ever speaking of it. This secret would remain buried until long after his death. Another shadow in a dynasty that would accumulate many shadows. For the next several years, Adolf wandered across America like a ghost, taking whatever work he could find. He laid bricks in Baltimore. He cut stone in Philadelphia. He shoveled coal into the fireboxes of steam engines. He dug ditches and canals. Every penny he earned, he saved. Every job he took, he performed with the same meticulous attention that had impressed his brewing masters in Prussia. He was building something, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. He was building a future. By 1869, he had saved enough to take a position at the John Stenger Brewery in Naperville, Illinois. Finally, he was back in the business he loved. The Stenger Brewery was a modest operation, but it was run by German immigrants who understood quality. Adolf threw himself into the work, quickly proving himself indispensable. He mastered the brewery's systems, improved their processes, and earned the trust of the Stenger family. Some accounts suggest that John Stenger hoped Adolf would marry one of his daughters and take over the family business. Other accounts suggest that Adolf did fall in love with a Stenger daughter, only to be rejected. Whatever the truth, something happened that sent Adolf Coors heading west in 1872, chasing rumors of pure mountain water flowing through the Colorado Rockies. He arrived in Denver with a modest amount of savings and an immodest amount of ambition. The city was booming. Gold and silver miners flooded the territory, desperate for entertainment, eager to spend their earnings on whiskey, gambling, and beer. Adolf saw opportunity everywhere he looked, but he also saw something that most prospectors missed: the water. While everyone else was searching for precious metals in the streams, Adolf Coors was thinking about how those streams could produce precious beer. He traveled up into the foothills west of Denver, following Clear Creek, until he reached a small settlement called Golden. There, nestled at the base of Table Mountain, he found what he was looking for. Water so pure, so cold, so perfectly suited for brewing that it seemed like a gift from heaven itself. In 1873, Adolf partnered with a Denver confectioner named Jacob Schuler to purchase an abandoned tannery along the banks of Clear Creek. The building was a wreck, little more than stone walls and a leaky roof, but Adolf saw a brewery. He saw copper kettles where others saw empty space. He saw fermentation tanks where others saw debris. He saw his destiny. By 1874, the partners were producing beer. By 1880, Adolf had bought out Schuler's interest and renamed the operation the Adolf Coors Golden Brewery. He was 33 years old, finally the master of his own fate. Around this same time, Adolf met a woman who would change everything. Her name was Louisa Weber, the daughter of the superintendent of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad maintenance shops. She was young, beautiful, and possessed of a warmth that the cold, taciturn Adolf desperately needed. On April 12, 1879, they were married at a small ceremony on the brewery grounds. It was a union of opposites. Adolf was hard, demanding, obsessed with perfection, incapable of small talk or casual affection. Louisa was soft, nurturing, able to find joy in simple pleasures, eager to build a home filled with laughter and love. Together, they would have 8 children, though only 6 would survive infancy. The 2 who died were buried in unmarked graves. Adolf, the man who recorded every detail of his brewing process with meticulous precision, left no record of where his own children were laid to rest. He simply could not bear to speak of them. As the brewery grew, so did Adolf's wealth. Miners from across the territory developed a taste for Coors beer, praising its smooth flavor and consistent quality. Unlike many frontier breweries that produced swill barely fit for human consumption, Adolf maintained the same exacting standards he had learned in Prussia. Every batch was tested, Every ingredient was inspected. Every employee who failed to meet his expectations was dismissed without sentiment. He ran his business like a Prussian general, demanding absolute loyalty and absolute excellence. The workers respected him, but few could claim to like him. He was, in the words of one historian, cold, taciturn, deeply unpleasant, and deeply unhappy. By 1890, Adolf Coors had accumulated enough wealth to give his beloved Louisa the gift she deserved. He would build her a mansion. Not just any mansion, but a home grand enough to rival the estates of the established Eastern families who looked down on new money immigrants like himself. He chose a spot on the brewery grounds, a small hill overlooking Clear Creek and the towering peaks of the Rocky Mountains. The site had previously held a dance pavilion and beer garden, gathering places where workers and townspeople had celebrated on warm summer evenings. Adolf demolished them without sentiment. In their place, he would construct a monument to his success. The Coors mansion rose from the Colorado soil like a Victorian dream. 22 rooms spread across multiple floors, each one designed to showcase the wealth and taste of its owner. A grand entrance hall welcomed visitors with polished wood floors and crystal chandeliers. A formal dining room featured a table long enough to seat the entire Coors clan. A music room held a Steinway piano that gleamed beneath a chandelier imported from Copenhagen. A library overflowed with books written by German authors, the language of Adolf's homeland, the tongue he still preferred when speaking to his wife. Oriental rugs covered the floors, handcrafted furniture filled every room, and hidden near Adolf's favorite easy chair sat a round table with a concealed radio, a secret pleasure in a house full of secrets. Yet even as he built this palace for his wife, Adolf could not escape the darkness that had followed him across the ocean. He had no hobbies. He did not enjoy sports or entertainment. At formal Sunday night family dinners, barely a word was spoken. The children sat in silence while their father brooded at the head of the table, lost in calculations and concerns that he never shared. He pumped almost every dollar he earned back into the brewery, expanding and improving with the same obsessive energy that had driven him since boyhood. The mansion was for Louisa. The brewery was for Adolf, and neither could fully satisfy the emptiness that seemed to live at his core. The family grew up in that grand Victorian house, surrounded by wealth yet stifled by their father's emotional coldness. Louise, the firstborn daughter nicknamed Lulu, was the apple of her father's eye. Augusta, called Gussie, followed close behind. Then came Adolf Jr., born on January 12, 1884, the son who would carry on the family name. Bertha arrived in 1886, Grover in 1888, and finally Hermann Friedrich Coors in 1890, born while the family was vacationing in Berlin. All three daughters attended the Wolcott School for Girls in Denver. The sons were groomed from childhood to take over the family business. There was no question of alternative careers, no discussion of personal dreams. You were a Coors. You served the brewery. That was the only acceptable path. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Coors empire continued to expand. By 1900, the brewery was producing more beer than ever before, shipping its product across the American West. Adolf had built something remarkable, transforming a ruined tannery into one of the largest single-site breweries in the nation. His beer was praised for its quality, his business acumen was respected throughout the industry, and his family occupied a prominent position in Colorado society. But success could not purchase happiness. Adolf remained as cold and unhappy as ever, a man who had achieved every material goal he had ever set for himself, yet found no peace in his accomplishments. In 1912, when Adolf was 65 years old, he made a decision that would shape the family for generations. He appointed his son, Adolf Jr., as superintendent of the company. 2 years later, all three of his sons were firmly embedded in the business. The younger generation had absorbed their father's obsession with quality and his suspicion of outsiders. They had also absorbed his emotional unavailability, his inability to express warmth or vulnerability. The curse of the Coors family, if it can be called a curse, was not supernatural. It was simply the cold, hard heritage of a man who had learned to survive by suppressing everything soft within himself. Then came prohibition. In 1914, the Volstead Act passed, prohibiting the sale of alcoholic beverages throughout the United States. For most breweries, this was a death sentence. Hundreds of operations closed their doors forever, their owners bankrupt, their workers unemployed, their machinery sold for scrap. But Adolf Coors had not survived stowaway passage, orphanhood, and decades of brutal competition by surrendering to adversity. He pivoted. If he could not sell beer, he would sell malted milk. If he could not brew alcohol, he would manufacture porcelain products using the clay deposits near Golden. The company that would eventually become Coors Tech began as a desperate survival strategy during the darkest period in American brewing history. But survival came at a cost. Adolf watched helplessly as his life's work was rendered illegal, as his brewery sat idle, as his dream of creating the world's finest beer was postponed indefinitely. The man who had built an empire on brewing could no longer brew. The man who had dedicated his entire existence to creating something beautiful was now reduced to making malted milk and ceramics. For someone of Adolf's temperament, someone who found meaning only in his work, this was a devastating blow. His already grim disposition darkened further. His family watched him retreat into silence, unable to reach him, unable to offer comfort that he would never accept. In April of 1929, Adolf and Louisa traveled to the Cavalier Hotel in Virginia Beach, Virginia. The trip was supposed to help Adolf recover from a lingering case of influenza that had weakened him over the previous months. He was 82 years old now, his body finally failing even as his mind remained sharp. For 2 months, the couple stayed at the luxury resort, enjoying the sea air, the elegant surroundings, the temporary escape from the pressures of business. But something was wrong. Louisa later testified that her husband woke early on the morning of June 5th, made his way to the window, and without saying a word, either fell or stepped out into the void. The coroner declared the death unnecessary to investigate. No autopsy was performed. The body was shipped back to Denver by train, and Adolf Coors was buried while the family maintained a stoic silence. His will contained only 2 stipulations. First, that his hotel bill be paid in full. Second, nothing else. No explanations, no farewells, no expressions of love for the wife and children he was leaving behind. Even in death, Adolf Coors could not bring himself to show emotion. The official ruling was suicide, though alternative theories have circulated for nearly a century. Some suggest he fell accidentally, his aged body betraying him at a critical moment. Others whisper about murder, pointing to family tensions and the strange absence of an autopsy. We will never know the truth. Like so many other secrets, it disappeared with the man who took it to his grave. Back in Golden, flags at the Coors brewery flew at half-mast. The entire community mourned the man who had put their small town on the map. But inside the Victorian mansion on the brewery grounds, the family faced a grim reality. The patriarch was gone. Prohibition showed no signs of ending, and the burden of the Coors legacy now fell on shoulders that were not sure they could bear the weight. Adolf Jr. took control of the company, continuing his father's tradition of relentless perfectionism and emotional distance. His three sons, Adolf III, William, and Joseph, were groomed for leadership from childhood, just as he had been groomed. The pattern repeated. The coldness persisted. The shadows lengthened. Within the mansion itself, life continued in its strange, silent rhythm. Louisa remained in residence, surrounded by the oriental rugs and handcrafted furniture that her husband had purchased, playing the Steinway piano that gathered dust in the music room, sleeping alone in beds that had once held two. The library still contained its German volumes. The concealed radio still sat near Adolf's empty chair, and the great Copenhagen chandelier still cast its light over rooms that felt more like mausoleums than living spaces. The mansion that had been built as a gift of love had become a monument to loss. Then came 1933, and everything changed. Prohibition was repealed. The Coors brewery roared back to life, producing beer once again for a nation desperate to drink legally. Adolf Jr. expanded the market aggressively, pushing into 10 Western states, perfecting the malting processes, innovating with new packaging technologies. The company introduced tin plate cans, then aluminum cans. They developed the sterile fill process that would become an industry standard. They maintained constant refrigeration from brewery to customer, ensuring that every bottle of Coors reached consumers in perfect condition. The empire that Adolf Sr. had built was now growing beyond anything he could have imagined. But the Coors family distrust of outsiders grew alongside their success. Having nearly lost everything during Prohibition, having watched competitors collapse while they barely survived, the Coors family developed a siege mentality that would define their culture for generations. They rarely borrowed money, preferring to fund expansion through reinvested profits. They abhorred union labor, viewing organized workers as threats to family control. They shunned publicity as much as possible, believing that fame invited scrutiny and scrutiny invited danger. A photograph of a Coors in the society pages was a rare occurrence. Privacy was paramount. Secrecy was survival. This obsession with secrecy extended to the mansion itself. The great Victorian house remained closed to the public, accessible only to family members and trusted employees. Tours were never offered. Journalists were never invited. What happened within those 22 rooms stayed within those 22 rooms. The books in the library, the radio hidden in the side table, the memories embedded in every beam and floorboard, all of it remained locked away from prying eyes. The mansion became a fortress within a fortress, the innermost sanctum of a family that trusted almost no one. In 1934, the first major kidnapping threat emerged. Paul Robert Lane, a former Colorado Prohibition agent, conspired with several associates to abduct Adolf Jr. for a ransom of $50,000. The elaborate plan called for the delivery man to proceed through multiple checkpoints, ensuring no police followed, before releasing Coors somewhere near Colorado Springs. But Denver police discovered the conspiracy while investigating an unrelated auto theft ring. In a remarkable display of courage, Adolf Jr. volunteered to be kidnapped so that police could catch the suspects in the act. Fortunately, Lane was arrested on other charges before the plot could unfold, and the conspiracy collapsed. But the close call had lasting effects. The Coors family's already intense security consciousness escalated dramatically. They began traveling in convoys. They varied their routes. They avoided public appearances whenever possible. The patriarch had ordered that his family spend most of their after-hours time at the whitewashed ranch house on company property. Outsiders were viewed with suspicion. New acquaintances were vetted carefully. The walls around the Coors family grew higher and thicker with each passing year. They had built an empire, but that empire had become a prison. Meanwhile, a new generation was coming of age within those walls. Adolf III, born in 1915, was the oldest son of Adolf Jr. and his wife Alice May Kistler. Like his father and grandfather before him, young Ad was groomed for brewery leadership from childhood. He attended Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire, then Cornell University, where he served as president of the Quill and Dagger Society and joined the Kappa Alpha Society. He was intelligent, capable, and completely allergic to beer. The heir to one of America's greatest brewing empires could not drink the product that made his family rich. His father was disgusted by this cruel irony, yet another source of tension in a family that seemed to specialize in producing tension. Ad's brothers, William and Joseph, followed similar paths. William also attended Cornell and harbored a secret dream of becoming a concert violinist. Joseph graduated from Cornell with a degree in chemical engineering and was perhaps the most intellectually gifted of the three. But personal dreams meant nothing in the Coors family. William gave up his musical aspirations. Joseph suppressed whatever passions he may have harbored. All three brothers joined the family business, sharing an office with 3 metal desks, wearing leather high tops and button-down shirts, as their father had mandated. No sport coats, no displays of wealth, no acknowledgement of the billions flowing through their hands. The Coors way was modesty, discipline, and absolute dedication to the brewery. By the late 1950s, the Coors Brewing Company was the 14th largest beer producer in the United States and easily the most dominant brewer west of the Mississippi. The family had survived prohibition, survived kidnapping threats, survived the Great Depression, and built something that seemed destined to last forever. Adolf III, now in his mid-40s, served as CEO and chairman of the board. His brothers Bill and Joe handled operations and manufacturing respectively. The triumvirate ran the business with precision and efficiency, maintaining the exacting quality standards that their grandfather had established nearly a century before. Everything seemed perfect. Everything seemed secure. Then came February 9th, 1960. On that cold winter morning, Ad Coors kissed his wife Mary goodbye and climbed into his international travel-all station wagon. He was headed to the brewery in Golden, following the same route he took every day, a winding mountain road that passed through Turkey Creek Canyon. The road was quiet, isolated, perfect for a man who valued privacy above almost everything else. Ad had recently moved his family to a ranch in the foothills, seeking escape from the pressures of the brewery, pursuing his true passion of raising cattle and horses. The commute was longer, but the peace was worth it. As Ad approached Turkey Creek Bridge, he noticed something unusual. A canary yellow 1951 Mercury sedan was stopped in the middle of the narrow span, its hood raised, its driver standing beside it, as if experiencing engine trouble. Ad slowed his vehicle and pulled up behind the stranded car. He was not the type to ignore someone in need. Despite his immense wealth and the security concerns that plagued his family, Ad Coors remained fundamentally decent, fundamentally trusting, fundamentally human. He stepped out of his travel-all and walked toward the yellow Mercury. The driver was a 31-year-old man named Joseph Corbett Jr. He was a former Fulbright scholar who had once been headed to medical school before his life took a catastrophic turn. In 1951, Corbett had killed an Air Force sergeant during a botched robbery, shooting the hitchhiker in the back of the head. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to prison in California. After years of good behavior, he was transferred to a minimum security facility. He escaped. For 5 years, he had been living under the alias Walter Osborne, drifting through dead-end jobs, growing increasingly desperate, increasingly willing to take extreme measures to solve his financial problems. Corbett had studied the Coors family for months. He knew their routines. He knew their vulnerabilities. He knew that Ad Coors crossed this isolated bridge every morning, alone, unguarded, utterly exposed. The plan was simple: stop the target's vehicle, force him into the Mercury at gunpoint, transport him to a hidden location, and demand $500,000 for his safe return. Corbett had handcuffs and leg irons waiting on the back seat. He had a ransom note already typed and ready for mailing. He had everything planned to the smallest detail. What he did not plan for was Ad Coors fighting back. When Corbett pulled his pistol and ordered Ad into the car, the brewery heir did not comply. Perhaps decades of Coors' stubbornness rose up within him. Perhaps he calculated his odds and decided that compliance was not the safer choice. Perhaps he simply refused, on principle, to surrender to a criminal. Whatever his reasoning, Ad Coors broke away and ran. He ran toward the railing of the bridge, toward the creek below, toward any chance of escape from this nightmare. Corbett raised his weapon and fired twice. Both bullets struck Ad Coors in the back. The chairman of one of America's greatest brewing companies collapsed on the wooden planks of Turkey Creek Bridge. He was 44 years old. He left behind a wife and 4 children. He would never raise cattle on his beloved ranch. He would never see his children grow up. He would never return to the mansion where his family had lived for generations. What followed was one of the largest manhunts in American history, second only to the search for the Lindbergh baby kidnapper 3 decades earlier. Within hours of discovering Ad's abandoned travelall, police identified the vehicle and began a massive search of the area. They found Ad's hat near the bridge. They found his glasses. They found blood. But they did not find Ad. The FBI joined the investigation immediately, bringing resources and expertise that would ultimately crack the case. A milkman who had crossed the bridge that morning remembered seeing a yellow Mercury in the area. Witnesses recalled a man matching Corbett's description lingering near the bridge in the days before the disappearance. The net began to close. The next day, Mary Coors received a typewritten ransom note in the mail. The letter demanded $500,000 for her husband's safe release. Do not contact police, it warned. Do not record serial numbers. Place the money in a suitcase and wait for further instructions. The writer did not know that Ad Coors was already dead, his body hidden in a dump area miles away. The writer did not know that the FBI was already tracing the note back to its source. The writer did not know that his carefully planned scheme had fallen apart the moment Ad Coors decided to resist. For 7 agonizing months, the Coors family waited. Mary followed the kidnapper's instructions, hoping against hope that her husband might somehow be alive. The FBI distributed over 1.5 million posters with Corbett's photograph, creating one of the largest publicity campaigns in Bureau history. Investigators traced Corbett's movements from Denver to Atlantic City, where his burned-out Mercury was discovered in a dump. They analyzed soil samples from the car's undercarriage, identifying rare pink feldspar and granite minerals that would eventually lead them to Ad's remains. They tracked Corbett across the country and into Canada, following a trail of aliases and temporary addresses. On September 11, 1960, hikers in the Rocky Mountains stumbled upon a pair of discarded trousers. In the pocket was a penknife bearing the engraved initials AC3. The discovery triggered an intensive search of the surrounding area. FBI agents combed through the dump site for days, eventually recovering skeletal remains, clothing with bullet holes, and enough evidence to confirm what everyone had feared. Adolf Coors III was dead. He had been murdered on that bridge 7 months earlier, shot twice in the back while trying to escape his kidnapper. The news devastated the Coors family and shocked the nation. Here was one of America's most prominent businessmen, killed not in some foreign war or industrial accident, but on a quiet country bridge by a desperate fugitive. The murder confirmed every fear the Coors family had harbored for decades. Outsiders were dangerous. The world was hostile. Trust was weakness. Their fortress mentality, already intense, would become even more impenetrable in the years that followed. Meanwhile, the manhunt for Corbett intensified. The FBI placed him on the 10 most wanted fugitives list, distributing his photograph to police agencies worldwide. In October 1960, a woman in Winnipeg recognized Corbett's picture from a Reader's Digest article and reported a man matching his description. Another tip placed him in Vancouver. Canadian police tracked Corbett to a motor inn, where they found his fire-engine red Pontiac parked outside. When officers knocked on his hotel room door, Corbett opened it and said simply, "I give up. I am the man you want." The trial was a sensation. Corbett never testified, never explained his actions, never showed remorse. Prosecutors built their case on circumstantial evidence, including the typewriter that had produced the ransom note, the handcuffs found in his apartment, and the soil samples that traced his movements. The jury deliberated for 16 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on charges of first-degree murder. Joseph Corbett Jr. was sentenced to life in prison. He would serve 19 years before being paroled in 1980. He drove a truck for the Salvation Army until he retired. He died in 2009, just 10 miles from where he had killed Ad Coors nearly 50 years earlier. He maintained his innocence to the very end, though no one believed him. His final exit from this world came the same way Adolf Sr. had departed in 1929, by his own hand, alone and unrepentant. For the Coors family, the murder created wounds that would never fully heal. Mary Grant Coors, Ad's widow, struggled with grief that eventually manifested as alcoholism. The family patriarch, Adolf Jr., cut Mary and her children off from the main family, creating a rift that would persist for generations. A monthly pension of $3,400 was provided, but emotional support was not. The Coors way was to soldier on, to suppress feeling, to maintain the facade of strength regardless of the devastation within. Mary's children grew up in the shadow of their father's murder, haunted by questions they could never answer. Ad's oldest son, Adolf Coors IV, took a different path. He became a born-again Christian who struggled for years with his father's violent death. Starting in 1978, he visited the prison where Corbett was incarcerated, attempting 3 times to meet with his father's killer. Each time, Corbett refused to see him. On his final visit, knowing Corbett would again refuse, young Adolf tucked a note into a Bible and handed it to a prison guard. The letter read, "I want to forgive you for what you did to my family. And I ask for your forgiveness for the hatred we have had for you all these years." It was an act of grace that would have been unimaginable to his great-grandfather, the cold, taciturn founder who could not even mark the graves of his own children. Back in Golden, the Coors mansion stood witness to all of this tragedy. In 1961, just a year after Ad's murder, the entire house was moved. The brewery needed to expand, and the mansion occupied space that could hold fermentation tanks and bottling lines. Engineers lifted the Victorian structure, and transported it 300 feet to the east, rotating the building 90 degrees so that it faced Castle Rock instead of the new industrial complex. What had once been a gift from a husband to his wife was now an obstacle to be relocated, a relic of a bygone era surrounded by the machinery of modern production. The move was symbolic, though the family would never have admitted it. The mansion that Adolf Sr. had built for love was now dwarfed by the empire that had consumed everything else. Today, the Coors mansion still stands on the brewery grounds, visible from Highway 58 if you know where to look. It is surrounded by pine trees and lawns, much as it was when Adolf Sr. first built it, but almost lost behind the towering structures of the modern brewery complex. Tours are not offered. Journalists are not welcome. Only family members are permitted inside, and even they rarely visit. Most of the 22 rooms retain their original design and decor. The books written by German authors still fill the library shelves. The oriental rugs, handcrafted furniture, and round table with the concealed radio still sit near where Adolf's favorite chair once stood. The Copenhagen chandelier still hangs from its high ceiling, and the Steinway piano still waits for players in the music room. But no one plays. No one reads. The mansion has become a time capsule, perfectly preserved and utterly empty. The legacy of Adolf Coors extends far beyond beer and architecture. His grandson Joseph, the youngest of Adolf Jr.'s sons, channeled his inheritance into politics rather than brewing. In the 1960s, Joseph discovered the writings of Barry Goldwater and found a coherent articulation of conservative ideology that seemed to speak his own mind. He began funding causes that aligned with his beliefs, eventually meeting a California politician named Ronald Reagan in 1967. That meeting would change American history. Joseph Coors became part of Reagan's kitchen cabinet, the group of wealthy donors and advisors who financed Reagan's political career from the governorship of California to the White House. In 1973, Joseph wrote a check for $250,000 to establish the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank that would become one of the most influential policy organizations in Washington. His brother William later described Joseph as being a little bit right of Attila the Hun. The description was not meant as criticism. In the Coors family, extreme positions were respected as long as they were held with conviction. Joseph funded the Free Congress Foundation, the Mountain States Legal Foundation, and the Independence Institute. He supported candidates and causes that advanced his worldview. He used the fortune built by beer to reshape American politics in ways that continue to reverberate today. But even Joseph could not escape the family curse of emotional distance. His children grew up wealthy and isolated, raised by a father whose attention was focused on business and politics rather than family life. His son Joseph Jr. was essentially disowned for transferring from Cornell to North Carolina State and marrying young without family approval. For years, the younger Joseph worked outside the Coors empire, eventually reconciling with his father and joining the porcelain business. The pattern of coldness repeating across generations, of fathers failing to connect with sons, of wealth substituting for warmth, continued unbroken. William Coors, the middle brother who had dreamed of being a violinist, outlived them all. He worked for the brewery for over 65 years, serving in various leadership positions, embodying the Coors' dedication to quality and the Coors' inability to break free from family expectations. He died in 2018 at the age of 102, having witnessed nearly the entire arc of the Coors story, from Victorian mansion to multinational corporation. His estate in Golden sold for $4 million after his death. Just another piece of Coors property passing into new hands. The Coors family story is ultimately a story about the cost of empire. Adolf Sr. crossed an ocean to escape conscription and build something beautiful, but he could never escape the coldness that had been forged in the fires of his orphaned childhood. He built a mansion for his wife, but he could not build the emotional connection she deserved. He created a brewing empire, but he found no peace in his success. His son inherited the business and the burden. His grandsons inherited the same. Generation after generation, the Coors men achieved extraordinary material success while failing at the most basic tasks of human intimacy. They were rich beyond imagination, yet profoundly poor in the currencies that matter most. The mansion on the brewery grounds stands today as a monument to that paradox. 22 rooms filled with beautiful objects, surrounded by billions of dollars in brewing equipment, accessible only to family members who rarely bother to visit. The library books are unread. The piano is unplayed. The chandelier illuminates empty rooms. All the wealth and all the success and all the carefully preserved artifacts cannot change the fundamental truth at the heart of the Coors story. You can build an empire. You can construct a mansion. You can amass a fortune that would make kings envious. But if you cannot connect with the people you love, if you cannot express the emotions that make us human, if you cannot break the cycle of coldness that passes from father to son, then all of it means nothing. The ghost of Adolf Coors Sr. still haunts that Victorian house. Not literally, of course. There are no reports of supernatural activity, no tales of spectral appearances in the music room or library, but his spirit, his coldness, his inability to show warmth, lives on in the very walls he built. The mansion was supposed to be a gift of love. It became instead a monument to everything his family could not say, could not feel, could not express across generations of silence and suppression. When visitors tour the Coors brewery today, they walk past the mansion without entering. They see its Victorian facade through the pine trees, perhaps wondering about the family who lived there, the tragedies they endured, the empire they built. Most visitors are thinking about beer, not about the human cost of creating an American dynasty. Most visitors do not know about the founder who stepped off a window ledge in Virginia Beach, or the heir who was shot in the back on a mountain bridge, or the generations of fathers and sons who could not find the words to say I love you. But the mansion knows. The mansion remembers. And somewhere within those 22 rooms, preserved in amber like insects from a prehistoric age, the secrets of the Coors family wait for someone brave enough to speak them aloud. The sun sets behind Table Mountain now, casting long shadows across the brewery complex and the Victorian house that sits at its heart. Another day ends in Golden, Colorado, where the pure water of Clear Creek still flows past the copper kettles and fermentation tanks, where beer is still brewed according to standards established over 150 years ago, where the dream of a penniless stowaway became an empire that shaped American business and American politics. The Coors name appears on cans and bottles in every corner of the globe. The Coors fortune supports causes and institutions that influence millions of lives. The Coors legacy is written in stone and steel and the amber liquid that made it all possible. But the true story of the Coors family is not found in marketing campaigns or political donations or quarterly earnings reports. It is found in the silence of a Victorian dining room where children once sat mute before their brooding father. It is found in the unmarked graves of infants whose deaths were too painful to acknowledge. It is found in the empty rooms of a mansion built for love that became a prison of expectation. It is found in the blood on Turkey Creek Bridge and the body falling from a sixth-floor window, and the generations of men who could not say what they felt because they had been taught that feeling was weakness. The Coors mansion still stands, beautiful and abandoned and full of ghosts. Its doors remain locked. Its stories remain untold. Its secrets remain preserved in the oriental rugs and handcrafted furniture and German volumes that no one reads. Perhaps someday the family will open those doors and let the world inside. Perhaps someday the truth will emerge from behind the Victorian facade, and we will understand what price was paid for all that golden success. Until then, the mansion waits. The piano waits. The chandelier waits. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, the spirit of Adolf Coors waits too, still chasing perfection, still unable to rest, still haunting the empire he built from nothing but ambition and pain and dreams that turned to dust on a Virginia Beach morning nearly a century ago. Standing at the edge of the brewery grounds today, where tourists snap photographs and taste samples of the beer that built an empire, you can almost feel the weight of that history pressing down. The mountains that Adolf Sr. first glimpsed in 1872 still tower over Golden, their peaks white with snow even in summer. Clear Creek still tumbles past the brewery, its water as pure today as it was when a young immigrant recognized its potential. The recipe that Adolf perfected through decades of obsessive refinement is still used, still producing the same smooth, crisp beer that miners once praised in frontier saloons. In many ways, his dream has been fulfilled beyond anything he could have imagined. But dreams have a way of extracting payment. The price for the Coors empire was measured not in dollars but in human connection. It was measured in the tears that were never shed, the words that were never spoken, the embraces that were never offered. It was measured in the unmarked graves of children, the silent Sunday dinners, the sons who surrendered their own dreams to serve a family business they had not chosen. It was measured in blood on a mountain bridge, and a body falling through Virginia morning air, and generations of men who never learned to express what burned within their hearts. The mansion still stands, its Victorian silhouette visible through the industrial machinery that surrounds it. Perhaps in another century, when the brewery itself has become a historical artifact, someone will finally open those doors to the public. They will walk through the library and touch the German books. They will sit at the Steinway piano and play the music that the Coors family never had time to enjoy. They will discover the concealed radio and wonder about the man who sat there, listening to broadcasts from a world he had conquered but could not love. And perhaps, in that imagined future, visitors will understand what the Coors story really means. It is not a story about beer, though beer made it possible. It is not a story about politics, though politics amplified its impact. It is not a story about murder and tragedy, though these events shaped its narrative. At its core, the Coors story is about the human cost of ambition. It is about what we sacrifice when we chase perfection at the expense of connection. It is about the mansions we build and the prisons they become. This is the dark story of the Coors family mansion. This is what wealth can build and what it cannot buy. This is the truth that lives in stone and silence, waiting for someone to finally speak it aloud. The golden beer still flows. The Victorian mansion still waits. And the ghosts of the Coors family still linger in those 22 rooms, trapped forever between the dream of an orphan who crossed an ocean and the reality of an empire that devoured its own.